Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Kies. Thank you for listening to God Save the King, where you can listen to my show on the Truth Be Told radio network every Friday night at 10 p.m. Now, if you happen to be catching this right now, so in other words, at 6:45 p.m. on Wednesday, July 20th, you're catching the live broadcast. I don't always do this. Most weeks I do, but not always. Usually around this time, Wednesday, late afternoon or early evening Eastern time, I throw this out on Facebook, on my Facebook page, and then also on the Truth Be Told Radio Network page. So if you want to tune in at that time, you can get the advanced version, okay? But I'm recording this so that this can go out as part of my weekly radio broadcast every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. So you'll be able to catch it then as well. Now, if you do listen on Friday nights, hey, because like I said, I don't guarantee that I'm going to do this one, right? So hey, if you tune in Wednesdays, late in the afternoon and check out, Facebook and see if maybe I'm on, hey, I really appreciate that. I'm thankful that you do that. Make sure that you like the post and make sure you also go to my webpage and subscribe, and go to my YouTube channel and please subscribe there as well as the Truth Be Told Radio Network website and YouTube page. Please go there and subscribe and like and all that stuff, because you know the drill. Everybody says this when they do a YouTube video, that this is important. It helps us it helps us in the algorithms, right, on YouTube and Google and all that stuff, that we get more visibility and more people listen, and therefore it makes it easier for us to bring you more of this content. So if you like content of this nature, please do that. Okay, so anyway, but if you're listening right now, right this minute, it's Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday, July 20th, or early evening rather, Wednesday, July 20th, 2022, right? But then this show will be broadcast, quote unquote, on Truth Be Told Radio Network this coming Friday, which is Friday, July 22nd at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, which is when you can catch my show every week, guaranteed. It will always be on then, okay? Now, if you've not listened to my show before, what is God Save the King? Well, God Save the King is my ongoing 30-plus year biblical, historical, and scientific research project devoted to retelling the Nativity the way it really would have happened. And this, frankly, is because the traditional Nativity story that we are used to hearing is, in fact, Christian mythology, and it bears only the vaguest resemblance to, again, what really would have happened. So what I do is I dig into the Bible, I dig into history, I dig into archaeology, pun intended, I definitely dig into astronomy, particularly archaeoastronomy, which is what ancient cultures knew and understood about astronomy, to help us understand what this really would have looked like. And for the past several weeks, we have been looking into what I am calling the lineage of David, okay? The house and lineage of David. And that is a phrase that we get from the Gospel of Luke when we are told that Joseph and Mary had to travel to Bethlehem, or frankly, chose to travel to Bethlehem. Not were required to. Sorry, see, that's part of the problem there. It wasn't a requirement. It looks like that at face value. Okay, it looks like that at face value, but they actually chose to travel to Bethlehem and register there because they were of the house and lineage of David. So Luke chooses to make that a big deal, right? He spells that out as that the apparent reason that they traveled to Bethlehem is because they were the house and lineage of David, and Bethlehem is the city of David. It is where David was born, okay? And it plays a significant role in who Jesus is. Now, really quick plug here, this coming Saturday, okay, on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. So once again, if you're listening right now this second, it's Wednesday, okay? So this coming Saturday, the 23rd, July 23rd, or if you happen to be listening Friday night, it's tomorrow, right? If it's Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, we're going to have a conference simply entitled, Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus, right? So to a large degree, I'm talking about that right now, and I'm going to be doing a similar teaching or lecture or whatever you want to call it on during that conference. I'm going to be talking about who is Jesus in light of the house and lineage of David, right? Who is he, and why? Why is this important? Why is a genealogy important? And I've been baiting you guys for weeks. Okay, this is part 4 of the house and lineage of David. I did not intend for it to be this many parts, but here we are on part 4. Right? Why is this important? Why is a list of names important? And if you're reading the description as part of the teaser there on Facebook, yeah, I write out the fact that it says, look, genealogies are not just a list of names. They're not just a list of names. Genealogies are gold mines of cryptic information. The Bible is just packed. It is packed with cryptic information, meaning information you're not going to see unless you go chase it. Okay, it's not going to be there at face value. You're going to have to look for it, and that is what genealogies do. So in segment number 1, we did a lot of background information. I'm not going to talk about all that here, other than extremely briefly that we talked about these covenants, right? The covenants, especially the covenants that God made with the nation of Israel, they tell us about God's plan of redemption that frankly started even before the foundation of the world. And how does his plan of redemption work itself out in space-time, right? Because God, who is outside of time, told us the end from the beginning. He is telling us what is going to happen. So it's really a question of whether do you want to get involved in his plan of redemption or not, because he has told it to us in advance. He has prophesied it. He has declared it in advance. And this is part of how we know that it's real and that God is real, because he has told it in advance. And by now, hundreds of prophecies have been proven to be true. So that means the hundreds or even thousands that remain are pretty much guaranteed to be true. Okay. So in segment number 1 of the house and lineage of David, we talked about a lot of the background information and the covenants that set up why these genealogies important. The Abrahamic covenant, the covenant with the land, the Davidic covenant, and then the new covenant. Okay. And then in segment number 2, I emphasized the Davidic covenant. We talked at length about the Davidic covenant because the Davidic covenant is the seed clause, or amplifies the seed clause of the Abrahamic covenant. And what that means is that the seed clause is the people. Okay, because God promised Abraham a land, a seed, and a blessing. And what God said he was going to do was take that people, that seed, that people, and put them in a land of his choosing and then bless them. And these are unilateral, unconditional covenant promises that God has made to the nation of Israel. And frankly, we have yet to see these things completely fulfilled. We have seen them partially fulfilled, but we have never seen them completely fulfilled. Okay, so if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, of Jesus, the Messiah of Israel, then knowing God's plan of redemption is critical, and it's these covenants that spell it out. Okay. So the Davidic covenant, which was part 2 that I'm talking about here, that's where we emphasized the seed clause, the people, okay? Because Abraham was to have a physical seed, and then Abraham was to have a spiritual seed. In other words, literal, physical bloodline descendants, but then also children by faith, so to speak. See, and then those of us that are followers of Jesus the Messiah, because we have chosen to do that, we have taken part in the new covenant. That's the blessing clause of the Abrahamic covenant. We have taken part in the new covenant. So now we are Abraham's children by faith, so to speak. And that's what the new covenant tells us all about. Okay. And I mean the New Testament. I mean primarily the book of Romans. Book of Romans is the fundamental doctrine to the follower of Christ in chapters 1 through 8, right? And then in chapters 9 through 11, it tells us how we relate to Israel and Israel's critical part in God's plan of redemption. And then the remainder of the book is practical application, okay? So that was week 2. Now, week 3, last week, part 3, week 3, I talked extensively about some historical background information and how the fact that the birth of Jesus Christ and therefore these genealogies, they took place at a day and time when messianic expectation was at a peak, okay, in the nation of Israel and around the world. Because see, there is a counterfeit that parallels this, right? And I'm going to talk about this extensively in my Who is Jesus presentation at this seminar. So definitely check that out. There is a counterfeit, okay? The truth, the reality set up by the creator of the world is that he is producing a people descended from Abraham. He has chosen a land that he is going to put them in, and then he is going to bless them in that land. And when all of those pieces of the puzzle come together, it will be, in effect, quote unquote, paradise on earth, so to speak. Okay. Now, what's really interesting about that day and time, and we'll talk about that in the conference, is that it isn't perfect. We say paradise on earth, but I got the old air quotes going on here. It's only mostly paradise on earth, not completely paradise on earth. There's still some challenges during that time, but a resurrected King David is going to rule the nation of Israel at that day and time. Jesus the Messiah will be king of the world at that time, okay? So the counterfeit, right? The counterfeit is very important because the counterfeit is what we would call utopia. Okay, I was searching for this word last week in the files of my mind and I couldn't find it. So any man-made utopia is a counterfeit of what the Bible would refer to as the millennium, okay? The millennium. And that's where we're getting into eschatology and all that kind of stuff, which is critically important. It's very important to understand that stuff, but that's a different topic for a different day and time. Okay. So last week, though, we talked about messianic expectation, and we talked about the fact that messianic expectation was at an all-time high in the nation of Israel, and messianic expectation, air quotes, was also at an all-time high in the unbelieving nations, the Gentile nations, the pagan nations. Messianic expectation in Rome was at an all-time high. We talked about Virgil's fourth eclogue and the fact that he had this, like semi-pseudo prophetic poem that he wrote in the 1st century BC that prophesied a golden age that would be initiated by the birth of this special child. And the fact that this was grabbed onto by early Christians, the fact that Virgil had wrote this and that maybe this was some kind of Christian prophecy, which I really don't believe that's true. Maybe in a very outside, sideways kind of manner, but not legitimate. In other words, I don't think you count Virgil as a prophet of Christ the same way you count the Old Testament Jewish prophets as a prophet of Christ. And like I said last week, there are versions, see how, and this is how part of how it connects to God Save the King, is that there are versions of the nativity story from the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries that list these prophets that prophesied the coming of Christ. And of course they list Moses and David and Jeremiah and Isaiah, etc. But they also list Virgil, which that's like really weird. Why would a pagan Roman poet be a prophet of Christ listed in the same way as Moses and David and Jeremiah and Isaiah, who clearly were prophets of Christ operating under the inspiration of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Okay, Virgil didn't have any clue about this God, okay? Not about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not about the covenant-keeping God, the God of Israel, right? So that's what we're talking about. So that was last week, messianic expectation at an all-time high, but then also the fact that every nation in that area and in the known world was focused on royal succession. royal succession was a big deal. So it didn't matter whether you were talking about Rome, right, where you had Pompey and then Caesar and Mark Antony and Octavian fighting civil wars over who would become, frankly, king. Okay, we call it emperor, right? And the Roman Republic was in the throes of being transformed from a republic into an empire, but that meant a king. Okay, and like I said, we call it emperor, but that's what we mean. We mean king, right? And then you had the Parthian Empire. That's the other superpower on the other side of the Euphrates. You've got a power struggle going on there with King Herodotus and his brothers and sons fighting over who would have the throne, which was eventually landed on his son Phraates IV, who then ruled right up until the birth of Christ. And he died in 2 BC, about a year after Jesus was born, okay, but also about a year before the Magi showed up, of course, and the Magi oversaw royal succession in the Parthian Empire. So they show up and they say, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews?" Wow, really interesting question. Very provocative, the fact that Phraates, the king of Parthia, has just died. And are they or are they not looking for the next king of Parthia? So let's get into these actual genealogies. So as I started out in the first session, we talked about the fact that each of the 4 gospels has a different emphasis. Okay, Matthew, his emphasis is on Jesus as the Messiah and King. So that's clearly very important to what we're doing today. Mark, he emphasizes, which is really Peter, Mark is writing for Peter. He emphasizes Jesus's role as a servant. Okay, so the genealogy in Mark is adequate to that task. In other words, there isn't one. Okay, there isn't a genealogy in the Gospel of Mark because it emphasizes Jesus as a servant, and a servant, it doesn't matter what his genealogy is. Okay, then you have Luke. Luke focuses on Jesus's humanity. Okay, the son of Adam, the son of Adam, right? And so therefore you've got a genealogy there that goes all the way back to Adam, right? See, the genealogy in Matthew goes back to David and Abraham. Oh, really? That's interesting. David and Abraham. So in other words, it emphasizes descent from David, the house and lineage of David, but then it also emphasizes descent from Abraham, which is where this all gets kicked off, right? Because Abraham was the quote unquote first Jew. Okay, now that's a whole nother can of worms to unpack, because Abraham didn't start out a Jew. He is reckoned as the first Jew, okay, but he was a Gentile, okay, and he was a Gentile when he got saved, by the way, okay. But then the last one, of course, is the Gospel of John. John emphasizes Jesus' divinity. So likewise, the genealogy in the Gospel of John is adequate to that as well, which is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Okay, so that's all. And like I said, a whole nother can of worms there, right? So Matthew's gospel emphasizes Jesus, presents Jesus as the Mashiach Nagid, the Messiah, the King of Israel, right? So Jesus's royalty is on full display in the Gospel of Matthew, okay? So we see it in Matthew, unlike we see it in any other gospel, because the Gospel of Matthew appears to be written either to Jews or Jewish Christians, presenting the case for Jesus' kingship. And as such, his royal heritage must be established. So that is why you've got records here of, he's called the Son of David, right? The Son of David. Very, very important, okay? And we've talked about this many times. Remember that under David and Solomon, Israel was at the peak of its power and influence, also its largest geographically, right? Then under Solomon's son Rehoboam, that's when the kingdom becomes divided. All right. You have a northern kingdom called Israel, a southern kingdom called Judah. They both fall to foreign conquest. First, the northern kingdom to Assyria, then the southern kingdom to Babylon. And then that continues with Persia conquering Babylon, Greece conquering Persia, Rome conquering Greece. And then the Parthian Empire declaring its independence from Greece and retaking much of that. Also, at the same time, you have the tiny kingdom of Judea, the kingdom of Israel, declaring its independence from the Greek Empire and breaking away as well. That brings us to the Hasmonean dynasty, which ruled Israel, so to speak, from the middle of the 2nd century BC until the middle of the 1st century BC. So they were not legitimate Davidic kings. So that meant that they fueled messianic expectation, because on one hand, everybody is thrilled that they're not under foreign dominion anymore. But then again, at the same time, they're going, but wait a second. This isn't the line of David. When will we get a legitimate Davidic king back again? When will we get a legitimate king back again? So very, very, very provocative. And then, like I said, we've talked all about these covenants. Go back and listen to the previous sections, please, because there is, frankly, not a more rewarding Bible study that you can engage in than understanding the unconditional covenants made between God and the nation of Israel, because they outline God's plan of redemption. And it pains me to say it, that most Christians are woefully uneducated when it comes to this. So there, frankly, is not a more rewarding Bible study than you could engage in, than in understanding the 4 unconditional covenants made between God and the nation of Israel: the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant with the land, the Davidic covenant, and the new covenant, all made with the nation of Israel. And then, like I said 2 weeks ago, we really focused in on the Davidic covenant and why that's important. So now, once again, let's talk about these genealogies, okay? Matthew's genealogy and Matthew's infancy narrative focuses on Joseph's role and perspective in the nativity. Okay, let me repeat that. The infancy narrative in Matthew focuses on Joseph's role and perspective, and yet it recounts Mary's genealogy. Okay, now this is very God. God does this. Okay, I am really tempted to go off on a rabbit trail right now and explain a couple things about how God works, right? And that is that he will, a lot of times when we misunderstand something, it's because we're looking in the wrong place. Okay, we are looking in the wrong place. Okay, here's a super quick example. Let me just go there. Okay, a common debate, okay, in the Christian community is the quote unquote timing of the rapture, and or whether there even is a rapture. Okay, so number one, is there one? And number two, is it pre-tribulational, mid-tribulational, pre-wrath, or post-tribulational, right? Or as the joke goes, pan-tribulational, right? Okay, dumb joke. I'm not even going to give you the punchline. So, right? But here's the thing. If you don't understand the timing of the tribulation, it's not because you don't understand eschatology. It's because you don't understand ecclesiology. Okay, ecclesiology is the study of the church. So if you understood God's plan of redemption as it moves through the church and as it moves through Israel, you would understand the timing of the rapture. So what my point here is that we misunderstand stuff because we're not looking in the right spot. We are not diligent students of the Word of God. Okay, so Matthew's infancy narrative focuses on Joseph's role and perspective, but it contains Mary's genealogy. And of course, when you flip it, Luke is the other way around. Luke's infancy narrative focuses on Mary's role and perspective, and yet it recounts Joseph's genealogy. Okay, and and right out of the gate, we can talk about the placement of the genealogies, okay? Because in Matthew, he begins with the genealogy immediately. It's of critical importance to Matthew's gospel. He starts with, now here's that cryptic information. Like I said, genealogies are gold mines of cryptic information. So this includes, okay, well, where in Matthew's narrative is the genealogy placed? First thing, okay? So he is saying it is of prime importance, okay? This genealogy is of prime importance to what follows, okay? Now, in contrasts, Luke's genealogy technically isn't even a part of the infancy narrative. The infancy narrative has actually ended. Okay, it comes after Jesus's baptism and at the start of his public ministry. It's actually not part of the infancy narrative technically, right? So that is provocative as well. So Matthew, see, because the reason you would give a genealogy, right? Like, why do you do that? I mean, why is a genealogy even there, right? Because once again, it looks like it's just a list of names. Okay, well, why do you stick this list of names in there? Okay, there's got to be a reason. And the reason is because these genealogies establish certain information and are important to what follows. Okay, it's setting up what comes next. See, so in Matthew, the genealogy is setting up what comes next, which is the birth of the Mashiach Nagid, the Messiah, the King. So you've got this genealogy all through chapter 1, right? And then when you get to chapter 2, it's the Magi showing up. And what are the Magi asking about? Where is he who was born King of the Jews? By the way, where's the legitimate king? And what do the Magi do? But in their realm, they oversee royal succession. Oh my word. I mean, there it is. I mean, that's worth the price of admission right there. The fact that you've got a royal genealogy and then a few verses about the birth of Jesus, and then the Magi show up, and they are all about royal succession, right? There you go, right? But then Luke, like I keep saying, technically the genealogy isn't even a part of the infancy narrative. You have this big, long infancy narrative. Chapter 1 is this hyper long chapter. Then you get chapter 2, which is the actual birth and the shepherds, and stuff like that. And then the flight to Egypt. And then they beat feet back to Nazareth at the end of chapter 2. And then it starts chapter 3, and you got Jesus's baptism. You got John the Baptist, and then the baptism. And then you get the genealogy, right? Okay. Well, that's because it is setting up Jesus's public ministry, right? Okay. It doesn't mean it doesn't have any bearing on the nativity, because it certainly does, but the distinction is notable, right? The genealogy in Luke is about his public ministry. He is the son of Adam, right? He is the son of Adam. Now, the next rather obvious distinction and difference between these two genealogies is the order that they are presented in. Okay, because a genealogy can either be presented in either descending order, in other words, from parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, ancestor to descendant, right? So, quote unquote, forward, right? Or it can be ascending, in other words, from child to parent, okay, descendant to ancestor, backwards, okay? And of course, each one of these does one of those. Right? Matthew descends, quote unquote, and moves forward from Abraham, okay, and then goes from parent to child all the way down to Jesus, right? Luke, on the other hand, goes the other way. It moves, quote unquote, backwards, beginning with Jesus's legally adopted father, right, and then moving child to parent. See, now that's another critical component there, is it begins with Joseph, which is his legally adopted father. It's not his biological father, it's his legally adopted father, which is a very human thing to cover. Hence, Gospel of Luke, all about his humanity, right? His divinity, that's John, that's Gospel of John, and we're not really talking about that today, right? So this is talking about his humanity, and in human order, right? It's very important that all the I's would be dotted and the T's would be crossed, that the legal, ramifications have been met, that Joseph and Mary are married, right? They are legally married, that Jesus is now legally Joseph's son. Because if he's not legally Joseph's son, you've got a real problem. And that comes up later on. We're going to talk about that extensively as part of this, because it's part of the genealogy, is establishing the fact that Jesus has the right, okay, not only to be the king of Israel, but that he is the king of, quote unquote, the world. He's the king of humanity, right? He is descended from Adam, okay? He is the leader of everybody, right? And that is a big part of what Luke's genealogy establishes, right? So uh, and it, for appearance's sake, it doesn't necessarily appear that the order makes this huge difference, right? But I'm one of these guys, and that's what we're talking about today, is that I think every detail in Scripture matters, right? And that therefore, which order they go in, does matter, right? Okay, so Matthew, it's showing his descendancy from Abraham as part of God's covenant, right? So therefore, it begins with Abraham and goes through David, fulfilling those promises. But then also, likewise, and in reverse, Jesus's earthly authority, okay, is established through Luke, and therefore moves backwards through Luke. Okay, so the first thing we talked about is the placement. Matthew places it first right away. Luke places it later, right? Then you've got the order. Okay, Matthew works from Abraham down through David to Jesus, whereas Luke works backwards. He starts with Jesus and then goes through his adopted father Joseph and goes all the way back to Adam. Okay, so there's distinctions, real distinctions. Okay, then there is the format. Okay, now the difference in the format is subtle but distinct. Okay, so for example, Matthew's genealogy reads that Abraham begat Isaac, begat Isaac, Begat, begat Isaac. Okay, in other words, Abraham fathered Isaac, with the emphasis therefore being on the ancestor's act of fathering the descendant. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah, etc., etc., etc. So the Greek word Greek blah blah blah. The Greek word translated fathered is genao, okay, which it's related to the word Genesis, right? Okay, I won't bore you with the details of the Greek now, but in contrast, Luke's genealogy reads, which was the son of. Okay, so Matthew, Abraham fathers Isaac, but Luke's goes backwards. Therefore, it is that this person is the son of, right? Moving backwards, right? So the words son of, like if you actually got a Bible open and you're looking at it, the word son of, depending upon which version of the Bible you're working with, they may be in italics, okay? And then the reason they are in italics is because these are words that are not literally in the critical Greek text and were added by the translator for clarification. Now, they are properly supplied. Don't misunderstand, because there are times when you find that in Scripture and you see these verses, these words, not verses, when you see the words in italics, you've got to stop and ask whether those words are properly supplied, because not always. Most of the time, yeah, not always, right? So this is a case where they are properly supplied, and they are implied by the presence of the definite article in the masculine gender, okay? So masculine indicates son of as opposed to daughter, and then the genitive case indicates possession, which means of, okay? Son of, okay? But what this does is this very subtly gives equal weight to both the descendant and the ancestor, right? Okay? So they're kind of equal. Father and son are equals because this is the human genealogy, but in Matthew's genealogy, it's Abraham fathered Isaac, etc., 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 right? So it's subtle but distinct, but Matthew's genealogy emphasizes the act of fathering, okay? And it is factual and validates the covenant promise that by fathering the next generation inherits the covenant promise. Whereas Luke's genealogy implies sonship, right? And therefore establishes a natural condition that we are all descendant of the same race. We're all descendants of Adam, okay? So subtle distinction, but it's there, okay? It's there. These are, These are important things, okay? Now, this brings us to a part of this that is absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to try to go slow here so that you can follow along with what I'm saying, because I'm about to throw a lot of statistics at you, okay? So if you're watching a recorded version, like YouTube or something like that, and you want to stop and take notes, or you want to stop and digest what I'm saying, that's great. But if you're listening live, you're about to get clobbered with a lot of information. So turn on sponge mode and just try to absorb what I'm talking about here. Because what I want to talk about, the fact is, let's talk about some of this cryptic information, right? These genealogies are loaded with cryptic information, and I want to talk about the numerical structure of Matthew's genealogy in particular. Now, we are indebted in this case to the work of a man named Ivan Panin, or Panin. I don't know Russian well enough to know exactly how this is supposed to be pronounced. His last name is spelled Panin. Panin, I'm not sure. Ivan Nikolaevich Panin. Okay, I know Nikolaevich means son of Nicholas, right? Okay, now he was born in Russia, December 12th, 1855. Okay, and then he immigrated at a young age to Germany and then to the United States, coming to the United States in 1877. Okay, so he's 22 when he gets to the United States. He enrolled at Harvard and he graduated with a Master of Literary Criticism. Okay, in his early career as a lecturer, he was well known for being a firm agnostic. Okay, so well known, in fact, that when he discarded his agnosticism and accepted the Christian faith, it made local headlines telling about his conversion. Okay, so he was very well known as an agnostic, and then when he converted to Christianity, okay, I guess all over Boston and New England, it was like, oh my God, Ivan Panin became a Christian, right? Okay, now his conversion came about as the result of noticing what appeared to be a linguistic peculiarity in John chapter 1, verse 1, okay, which led to further research to determine if the underlying linguistic and mathematical pattern was true. So in other words, what he noticed was a mathematical pattern, okay, in the original language, okay, in Greek, right? And because of that, he was like, ooh, wow, that's really interesting. I got to go check that out. So he dives in and begins this study, right? Now, this research led to the publication of a book, which is entitled The Structure of the Bible, a Proof of the Verbal Inspiration of Scripture. And he published that book in 1891. And you can get this, you can get a copy, you can get an e-copy, via, the A word on, online, right? Okay. So he published that book in 1891, right? Now, in 1899, Panin wrote a letter to the New York Sun in response to an article or an editorial that is simply labeled by WRL. You know how editorials are. They write something in and they just go W and they just put their initials, right? So the initials are WRL. The letter was a response to a challenge posted by WRL, right? And this challenge read that some champion of orthodoxy should come into the arena of the Sun and give the readers some facts in defense of the Christian religion. Okay, so in his letter, Panin demonstrated the extraordinary heptadic. Now, what that means is the heptadic means the number 7, the extraordinary heptadic structure underlying the Gospel of Matthew, and he lists the following numerical patterns. Okay, now this is Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 11 only, and this is coming from the Greek. Okay, this works in Greek because what he did is he closely examined the Greek text, and what he did is he noticed that there were repeating patterns. Okay, that this repeating pattern surrounded the number 7. In other words, there would be 7 of something. right? So in other words, it turns out that the number of words in the Greek text in Matthew 1 through 11 is divisible by 7. Okay, right? So that's just a quick one, right? But not only is it the number of words, it's the number of the type of words, and it's the number of the letters and everything like that. And I'm going to read through this list here in a second, and get ready, be prepared to get your mind blown, okay? Because like I said, I'm going to go through a lot of statistics here, but it's not each individual statistic that matters. It's the accumulation, okay? Now, before I get into reading this, though, I want to share something with you about the nature of probability, okay? And that is because the probability, what is the probability of each one of these facts happening by chance? Because what we're going to see here, very simply, what we are going to see is that there is an extraordinarily minute structure in this genealogy, an extraordinarily minute structure, right? So that indicates a design and a designer. This kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. It just doesn't. It just does not happen by accident, right? So, but the reason I want to talk about probability is because each time I list one of these factoids, right, I want you to consider very briefly, right, the possibility that that could have happened by chance, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible for it to happen by chance. It just means it's maybe unlikely, okay? So let's start with the first criteria. The number of words in that record is 49. So in other words, 7 times 7, right? So the number of words is divisible by 7. So that means it has a heptadic structure, right? Now, what are the odds? What are the chances of that happening by accident? Well, I would suggest to you that the odds are 1 in 7, okay? And we're going to use 1 in 7 as the default odds, right? The odds might be a little better, they might be a little worse, okay? In other words, maybe the chances are 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 100. So I think 1 in 7 is a very fair option to work with here. But consider for a moment a pair of dice, right? And you take one die, not the pair, not both, one. You take one die and you want to predict the number that you're going to roll, right? So you say, well, I'm going to roll the number 3, and you throw the die, right? Your odds or your probability of throwing the number you predict is 1 in 6, right? Okay, now for the sake of argument, let's say that one die is one color and the other die is another color, and you're going to try to predict a very particular combination, not just a 3 and a 5, but that one die is black and that's going to be the 3, and the other die is red and that's going to be the 5. Okay, so the chances of throwing the black 3 on the single die are 1 in 6. The chances of throwing the red 5 on the red die are also 1 in 6. The chances of throwing the 2 in combination are 1 in 6 times 1 in 6, or in other words, 1 chance in 36. So every time you add another feature, another characteristic, you are multiplying, okay, the denominator, right? So instead of becoming 1 over 6, it becomes 1 over 36. So the chances of using our mind experiment here, our thought experiment, of throwing a pair of die with a red 5 and a black 3, your chances of throwing exactly that are 1 in 6, right? And anybody who shoots craps or frankly plays blackjack, right? Okay, they know this stuff, or even poker for that matter. They know this thing because it's the odds. It's the odds. That's what's important, is the odds, right? So what we're looking at here is what are the odds of these things being fulfilled by chance, or what is the possibility that there is a design and a designer behind this, right? Because the number, so that once again, this is the Gospel of Matthew, verses 1 through 11 only in the Greek. The number of words used is 49. So that is 7 times 7. So I would suggest that the odds of that happening by chance are 1 in 7. Now, go figure, the number of nouns is 42, which is divisible by 7. Okay, I would likewise say that the odds of that happening by chance are 1 in 7. But that means if you take the number of words and the number of nouns and multiply the probability of those two things, both happening by chance, now the odds are 1 in 49. Okay, following me so far? Now let's look at the next one. The number of non-nouns is 7. Okay, right? Which is divisible by 7. So what is the likelihood? What are the odds? What are the chances of that happening by chance? Well, 1 in 7. But that means now you have 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 times 1 in 7. So now you have one chance out of 343. Okay. Now, I won't take the time to painfully go through each one of the other characteristics I'm about to share. I'm simply going to multiply each one by 7, right? Because you have number of words, 49, one chance in 7. Number of nouns, 42. Okay. So the first number indicates that it is part of a heptadic structure. So the number of words, the total number of words is 49. That just means it falls in our heptadic structure. But the odds, I believe, are 1 in 7, right? Factor number 2, number of nouns, 42, heptadic structure, right? Odds also 1 in 7, but now 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 equals 1 in 49. Factor number 3, number of non-nouns, 7, part of the heptadic structure, but also 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 times 1 in 7, 1 in 343. The number of words that begin with a vowel is 28. That's divisible by 7. The number of words that begin with a consonant is 21, divisible by 7. The number of letters, 266, divisible by 7. The number of vowels, 140, divisible by 7. The number of consonants, 126, divisible by 7. The number of words that occur more than once, 35, divisible by 7. The number of words that occur only once, 14, divisible by 7, right? The number of words that occur in more than one form, 7, divisible by 7. The number of words that occur in only one form, 7, okay? The number of proper names, 35, and then the number of male ancestors, okay? 28, right? Also divisible by 7, right? So this is a quote, okay, about Panin's numerics, right? This enumeration of numeric phenomena of these 11 verses does not begin to be exhaustive, but enough has been shown to make it clear that this part of the genealogy is constructed on an elaborate design of sevens, okay? Because I just listed off, how many was that here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. Oh, of course, I know that. 14. I did that deliberately. It's 14 characteristics divisible by 7. Okay. But that's just me being cheeky. Anyway, if each one of these characteristics, the chances are 1 in 7, and then you multiply 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 times 1 in 7 14 times, okay? Because you saw how quickly that ramped up. One characteristic is 1 in 7. Two characteristics is 1 in 49. Three characteristics is 1 in 343. Four characteristics is 1 in 2,481. Five characteristics is 1 in 16,807. Okay, and it just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, and keeps going. So where does that leave us? In our case, each additional parameter multiplies the probability by 1 in 7. In other words, 1 in 7 times 7 times 7 times 7, etc., for a total of actually 13 times, because there's 14 characteristics, right? So the first one is the first time. You actually multiply it out 13 times. This means that the probability of these 14 parameters occurring by chance, okay, is 1 in 678 billion 223,072,849. That is the likelihood that this genealogy occurred by chance. 1 in 678,223,072,849. Okay? So in other words, it is basically statistically impossible for this genealogy to have occurred by chance. In other words, someone knew in advance, okay? Here, let me get there, because we haven't even read the genealogies yet, and reading them isn't even absolutely the point, right? But this is a chunk of Matthew, right? This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the mother of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, and Amon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Okay, that's the first 11 verses. That is what we're talking about here. Okay, so it's the point being is that in order for that heptadic structure to be accurate, someone had to know in advance. Okay, that means that every one of these sons was named by the leading of the Holy Spirit. Every father's son was named what God intended from father to son, or because all it would take is a couple of letters and it throws that whole thing off. Okay, you have this ridiculously highly detailed heptadic structure, and we're just scratching the surface. This is 11 verses out of 17, let alone when you include the rest. Okay, and there's much more to it than that, but I've proven my point, and we are indebted to the work of Ivan Panin, to reveal this, because like I said, he published this book, but what's even more amazing is that by the time he passed away, okay, ready for this? Panin went on to devote over 50 years of his life to painstakingly exploring the numerical structure of the Bible. He composed over 43,000 detailed handwritten pages of notes demonstrating the extraordinary phenomenal mathematical designs underlying both the Greek text of the New Testament and the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. Okay, he died at the age of 87 in 1942. But that is Ivan Panin, a Russian immigrant to the United States, studied at Harvard, was an avowed agnostic, but then was converted to Christianity, frankly, because he noticed the extraordinary numerical structure underlying the Bible. Okay, that it's just not a coincidence. It's just, frankly, it's not possible for it to be a coincidence, which reminds me of Romans chapter 1, when you get to verse 20, right? Romans chapter 20, I used to be able to recite it from memory. It's the one that goes, the invisible things of God are clearly seen by things that are made. In other words, the creation testifies of the creator. Okay. Natural man is convicted by the creation. All we have to do is look around. You look around and you should believe in God. It's just that simple. Okay. That is what scripture says. And something like this is just even more extraordinary proof that the Bible has a design and therefore a designer, and therefore we are accountable for what we read. So we're going to stop right there. That's a great place to stop, and we will continue this next time with some more extraordinary information about the genealogies in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, because there's more. That's not it. That's not the only thing. There is more gold to be mined out of these genealogies. So I want to thank you for listening. My name is Tim Keyes. I am the host of God Save the King. You can listen to God Save the King every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. God Save the King.